Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be sharing my research today on youth-targeted HIV prevention methods, specifically mapping out research priorities across latest literature. But first, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Jenny V. Tran, and I am an undergraduate student at the University of California, Berkeley. As the first author of this project, I will be the one presenting today. I'd also like to extend my thanks to my second author, Carissa Pertler, for her invaluable advice and suggestions for the research project. I'd also like to thank Ashley Hodge for her further suggestions and mentorship. This project would not be possible without them, so I'd like to extend my gratitude toward them both. All right, let's get started. So for today's presentation, we are going to be first discussing a little bit of background on HIV globally across the world. So we're going to be talking about infection rates as well as the current state of literature on youth-targeted HIV prevention. After that, we're going to be talking about the objectives and sort of significance of today's research. And then we're going to move on onto methodology, and then results, and then conclusions. So without further ado, let's move on to our background section. So HIV, or human immunodeficiency virus, impacts tens of millions of people worldwide every single year. Left untreated, it can lead to acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, otherwise known as AIDS. Youth populations are disproportionately impacted by HIV infections. In 2022 alone, those aged 15 to 21 made up 27% of 1.3 new global infections. So, this is why the implementation of prevention methods is super important to reduce these infection rates and keep people from getting sick. Researchers have already extensively studied many different prevention methods. However, the existing literature appears to focus a lot on things like the effectiveness of these methods, as well as model proposals and retention rates. So there's not that many studies on the state of literature itself. And what do I mean by this? Basically, this means that we aren't too aware of which types of prevention methods are most commonly discussed in academic conversations, and which ones are have less attention. And this is especially important because everybody, especially including youth, has their own individualized needs for HIV prevention. And this can vary according to cultural, biological, and environmental factors. So, because of this, we are going to be discussing the objectives of today's research. Our research goals will derives from keyword analysis. So basically, we are going to be tracking keyword counts across different categories of HIV prevention. And by doing so, we can be able to identify imbalances in the research landscape and see if there are certain methods that dominate the field and methods that remain more unexplored. So, by figuring that out, we can construct recommendations for future research, as well as foster more equitable public health efforts in order to expand reach toward more youth populations, as well as meet their individualized needs. So this is important to sort of even out the research landscape as well as the public health landscape globally. All right, so we're going to move on to our methods section. So for our methodology, we use the Web of Science core collection to generate our bibliometric data sets. We typed in this exact formula into the search bar. So that is the term HIV prevention coupled with youth and its synonyms. So that includes youth and adolescents, children, etc. And since we are discussing more recent literature, we decided to refine the years to more to the past 5 years. So that would be from 2020 to 2025. Additionally, since we want our articles to directly address prevention methods for youth specifically, we decided to limit our results so that these keywords would appear in the titles. So this would help us, more exclusively isolate these articles. So this ended us up with 384 initial results. And as I mentioned before, we want our articles to directly address the research topic at hand. So we went ahead and manually removed any articles that didn't directly address HIV prevention for youth populations. And in doing so, we ended up with 284 results. Oh, and I have to also mention that, there were a lot of articles that addressed HIV transmission between mothers and infants, but since that those articles don't talk about prevention for youth populations, we had to exclude those articles. All right, so after we ended up with those articles, we then used the sorting tool in Google Sheets to isolate the 100 most cited articles. And those are the eligible studies that we will be performing our bibliometric analysis on. All right, so now on to our results. As briefly mentioned before, we created 4 distinct categories of HIV prevention methods that we will be sort of dividing our data into. So these focus groups include biomedical, behavioral, structural, and digital. And here we listed a couple example keywords for each category. And this list isn't comprehensive, as you will soon see, but these are more of the, more common and obvious keywords. So for example, for biomedical, some of the keywords we would find is like PrEP, antiretroviral, tenofovir, and pharmacokinetics. For behavioral, that includes stigma, education, social and communication, and so forth. So then we mapped out keyword counts for all these terms and created bar graphs for each category. So as you can see, for our biomedical keywords, these keywords appeared the most frequently out of all the categories. So, this category was led by terms like pre-exposure, PrEP, and antiretroviral. Sorry. So these keywords popped up the most frequently, varying from 24 terms to 18 terms and 12 terms. All right, and behavioral keywords were pretty common as well. So this includes keywords like behavior, stigma, and education. So those keywords were also pretty common. Here we can see that there's sort of a dip in the keyword frequencies for structural keywords. So for services, programs, and barriers, those counts were more in the 7 to 9 count zone. So you see sort of a drop in the research priority here. And Lastly, we have our digital category, and this we have the least frequent keywords. So that includes terms like mobile, mHealth, and technology. And as you can see, just from the keyword counts alone, the research priorities seem to not be evenly distributed. So there's definitely a more concentrated focus on categories like behavioral and biomedical. We also generated a word cloud of the most frequent keywords overall. So these are the most common terms discussed in all the articles. And some of these terms are pretty obvious, like we have youth and HIV. However, some keywords like adolescent and adolescents and Africa were there too, which was pretty interesting. And we'll discuss this more in our conclusion section. All right, let's talk about sort of our findings and what we have concluded based on our data. We can see from our keyword counts that my biomedical and behavioral interventions were more commonly studied. And that means that structural and digital keywords appeared the least. It appears that the literature focuses more on biomedical and behavioral interventions. And so what can we derive from this? Basically, we recommend an increased attention to structural and digital prevention methods, both for research as well as on the field public health efforts. Because while biomedical and behavioral methods can work well for a lot of people, not everybody has the same resources and access or even preferences for the more widely studied tools. So they may prefer or they may need to use the less studied ones. However, if these methods aren't as studied, it's hard to sort of expand this accessibility to those who need it. And it can be really helpful for those sorry. And as well, it can be pretty helpful to combine these different categories as well to make a more efficient prevention plan for people. So there's just a lot of benefits in expanding research into the less studied domains, just so we can increase reach toward at-risk youth and meet their diverse needs. And especially because we live in a world with systematic vulnerabilities and evolving technology, it can be really beneficial to create more findings just by looking more into these topics. And next, as we saw from the high counts of Africa and adolescents, we can conclude that there's a concentrated research focus on more teenage and sub-Saharan populations, which can reflect public health needs. So that sort of provides us more context on the research landscape for youth-targeted HIV prevention literature. As for limitations, because this project uses keyword analysis as well as predetermined categories, which has its own predetermined keywords as well, we aren't able to fully capture the context that these keywords are being discussed. So there can be potential overlaps between these categories. So for instance, for one example of the term education popping up, we would automatically categorize that as a behavioral keyword. However, for that particular study, they might be addressing more so structural interventions. So that's one example of an overlap. And to address this limitation, we research methods like literature reviews and um, content analysis may be more able to sort of fill in those gaps. So, onto our reference list. Here are the works cited in our research project, as well as the images used in these slides. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.